Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here in the Divide. So we are going to talk about a unique type of ghoul that's found here in the Divide, because not all of them are pre-war, and I think this location is very, very interesting. So we've just come out of the Cave of the Abaddon, where the tunnelers live, and we will be talking about them in more detail shortly. But I wanted to talk about the marked men, so you can actually see a couple of them over there, which is very interesting. I've turned combat off and things just as I usually do for this stuff, because it's a lot easier to get a closer look at your enemies when they're not trying to murder you. The mole rats are friends though. Oh, is that a little baby one? Yeah. Ah. Look, baby. Anyway, sorry. I'm easily distracted by cute baby animals. It's, you know, it's a thing. I love the look of this place though, with the water flowing there and things. There is also death claws about in this location, if I remember correctly, but that's not why we're here. So, I think the important thing to bear in mind when we're talking about ghouls is that not all of them are pre-war. As in, you know, people that were alive before the bombs fell and then became ghouls when the bombs fell. Some of them, you know, the ghoulification process happens suddenly and fairly instant, and not all of them become feral right away either. See Moira Brown if you blow up Megaton, or Private Edwards and Camp Searchlight. And the Trooper ghouls in Searchlight are all feral except for Private Edwards, and this happened recently when the Legion set off the dirty bomb inside the fire station in Camp Searchlight, and that obviously decimated the NCR camp that was based there, and that's why the quest to dump the radioactive waste on Cottonwood Cove is called an eye for an eye, because it's an appropriate revenge, some might say. But an important location where something similar happened is here in the Divide. So we do need to touch on the kind of history of the location and what it actually is. So this area is located around two towns called Hopeville and Ashton. So you kind of start out in Hopeville, and there's a military base there, and then there's also Ashton, which is kind of over on this side. So these locations, there's a bunch of underground missile silos, so at least some of the US's nuclear arsenal was based here. Majority of them weren't actually launched, however, because as we know, essentially the Chinese shot first, so the US didn't manage to respond fully in time to fire back. And this location actually became quite an important one for the NCR, because it became an alternative route between sort of Shady Sands and Mojave. The idea being that if they could establish a new trade route through this place, then they could reduce the traffic on the Lone 15, the I-15, which is a big interstate highway. So because of that, a settlement grew out of this new trade route. So some people kind of moved in and decided to stay here, and they set up this settlement, and it thrived because there was a bold courier who was prepared to brave the not so nice weather. That's Courier 6. And Ulysses, if you talk to him, and you do get to have several conversations with Ulysses in this DLC, he believes that this location had a lot of potential to create a new nation that would bridge the gap between the East and the West. But the NCR were making use of it, and it was discovered by the Legion, so Caesar sent his Frumentari to cut off this supply line. So there's a couple of important background elements to this location that we need to keep in mind that kind of explains exactly what happened here and why it happened that way. First thing is that Hopeville was a manufactured town that was used for testing weather control systems that were being developed by the scientists at Big Mountain. And secondly, the missile silos and bases were built on active fault lines, you know, the bits of the Earth's crust that cause earthquakes, which in Southern California and that part of the United States, there's a lot of fault lines. Earthquakes are not uncommon in that area. But they have these missile silos, and they obviously use a lot of force, because they're intercontinental ballistic missiles, a lot of force to get up high enough and all the rest of it. so that potentially could be a problem, but things were going well. People were thriving. We had a good trade route going on that was bridging between Shady Sands and the NCR's territory and the Mojave. And then the courier brought a package from Navarro, which had the same markings that were seen in the military facilities around here. Unfortunately, it contained launch codes and activated the nuclear warheads, detonating quite a few of them while they were still stuck underground because the silos were sort of rusted shut and things, and some of them could be opened. So there was a lot of underground explosions on a fault line. So basically, this created a massive earthquake that kicked up some vicious dust storms. And between that and the weather experiments and the fault lines, it left quite a mess, which we can see here. I mean, there was a road there. It's collapsed. The buildings are all upside down and on their side. We've got scaffolding and stuff here. That's a floor, but it's a mess. It's a big mess. But there's these nasty kind of dust storms. So this did work in the Legion's favour because it meant that the divide was virtually impassable. With all the collapsed infrastructure, buildings that were unstable and liable to collapse at any moment, which as you make your way through the DLC, you do see that. And all these horrible dust storms. I mean, the weather's fairly clear here, but even in the distance it still looks dusty, and there can be some quite nasty dust storms in other parts of the divide. So the problem is that a bunch of NCR and Legion troops were in the area at the time because the Legion obviously wanted to take this location away from the NCR, and because it was helping the NCR and they didn't want that. Makes sense. So now we end up with unity between the bear and the bull. That's the bear, that's the bull. But in the worst possible way. So those who didn't die became ghouls. So we're going to come and get a good look. So they tend to congregate around radioactive areas, which is usually where the little warheads are that you can detonate. So we're going to get a look at this guy. So this is a Legion one. So they're ghouls. But they're not feral, and I think that's an important distinction. These guys are not feral ghouls. They're not the mindless zombies. They're aggressive to anything that's not them. But they are, they have these social groups. They can use weapons, they can use tools, as we can clearly see this guy's got a gun in his hand. They've got makeshift armour where they've taken like street signs and license plates and things to build armour out of. So they're quite a unique brand of ghoul. They're just aggressive to strangers, but they're not feral because they have a social structure and they have a bit more ability to reason and to use tools and things, which the feral ghouls do not. So the main difference is the lack of skin, and again you can quite clearly see just how red this guy looks, and that's what skeletal muscle looks like when the skin's not there, but there is still a blood supply and oxygen supply to the tissue. So the storms of the divide are said to flay a man alive, and this isn't an exaggeration, as you can plainly see. That's what's happened to these guys. So their skin is completely lost. Most ghouls will lose some parts of their skin, other parts of the skin might be thickened and it gets wrinkly and it doesn't look very nice, but on the whole they do still have their skin, but the marked men don't. And they hang around in radiation because, like all ghouls, they're healed by the radiation, but their musculature's exposed, and they probably endure pretty intense pain almost constantly because of this. And we'll get into that a wee bit more later on. We're going to talk a bit about the science behind it and things. But you can tell which faction they originally came from. So, this guy still has some remnants of the sort of Legion armour that is made of old kind of sports equipment, while if we come and have a look at this guy up here, he's got sort of NCR trooper armour on and things like that, but then they're adding bits to their armour, but you can see some parts of his skin are exposed, and he's got that same skin loss and skeletal muscle exposure, which has to be extremely painful. And so you can tell where they came from, which side they were on originally, but they're now their own faction, they're now their own side. They're neither Legion or NCR, they're marked men, and they hate everything that's not a marked man, essentially. So that's kind of where they come from. But some of them do sort of copy, especially the Legion-based ones. They do kind of idolise Legate Linnaeus, and there's a few of them that even copy his helmet and his blade. So he has the Blade of the East. There's one of the ones that you can encounter. So there's 4 named marked men that you can encounter in various parts of the Divide, and I think there's an achievement or something for killing at least 3 of them. So you've got Blister, who has a flamer, Beast, who has a shoulder mounted machine gun. You see him, he's on the high roads there, if I remember rightly, that's where he is. There's Bonesaw, who uses a chainsaw. Fun fact, that's what chainsaws were invented for. It was actually to help open up the pelvis during difficult childbirth. That's how the chainsaw was invented. So it seems quite fitting in that regard. And then Blade, who uses the Blade of the West. They're not very inventive nicknames, but these guys, but Blade does have a stealth boy, so he's a wee bit more challenging because you might not be able to see him. But they have these little camps all about the place. Usually have quite a good amount of loot and stuff that you can pick up. And let's see our range of action report. What's that again? Staff Sergeant Balmoral. Beggar counters are ticking like grandfather clocks on turbo. That's a good image. Yes, you can find some details about the NCR that were sent here. So this might have been their camp originally and everything, but then obviously these marked men have moved in and taken over the camp. So they still have got that. And then there's an addendum. Yeah, they've spotted Legion in the area. So this is the thing, is that the NCR were keeping an eye because their traders were using it, and then they found that the Legion had discovered it, and that's kind of how we end up with a mixture of Legion and NCR that became the marked men. And there are also 2 more unique ones that you can find depending on how you end this DLC. So when you get to the end of this, you find that Ulysses has set the nukes to launch, and you have the option of trying to stop the launch, or you have the option of nuking one or both of the NCR and the Legion's main bases. You can choose to do both, you can choose to do one or the other, or depending on your choices you can do neither. So if you nuke the Legion, then you could travel to Dry Wells. It's a location that gets added. It's very radioactive, very dangerous, but you can find Gaius Magnus, and he is a centurion that's wearing the armour of the 87th tribe. So a unique piece of armour. There's a unique weapon there as well. If you nuke the NCR as well, or instead, then you can find Colonel Royes in the Lone 15, who is wearing the Scorched Sierra Power Armour, and they also have unique weapons. So that's quite fun, and certainly if you're a unique armour and weapon aficionado, you might want to choose to do that, even though it will damage your reputation with both factions, or whichever factions you choose to attack, but you might want to do that for the items. But as I said, the important thing about these guys is that they're not feral. They're aggressive, but they're not feral. They have their wits, they set up camps, they set up ambushes, and they use their weapons and things. And I have to imagine that their existence is absolute hell. So we need to talk about the skin. So this is where the kind of science side comes into it with these guys, is talking about the skin and its importance to the body. So the skin has a number of important functions, and it's the largest organ in the body. And yes, I said organ, it's an organ. It just covers everything. And the list of functions includes a physical barrier against things like microorganisms, temperature regulation, water balance. It prevents you from losing fluid. So that's one thing that if someone has, say, extensive burns, that disrupt the skin's barrier, then they can be at risk of getting dehydrated because of that. So if you have someone that has really severe burns, it is important then that you keep them hydrated by IV fluids as well as treating the damage to the skin. So that's actually very important. Vitamin D synthesis, which is important for balancing calcium. If you don't have enough vitamin D, then your bones start losing calcium and you can start to get problems with metabolic bone disease, which can lead to pathological fractures and things. Not a good time, not worth it. So vitamin D, and that is because your skin can produce vitamin D when it's exposed to UV light from the sun. And vitamin D also has an important role in immune functions. Your skin also helps excrete waste metabolites like urea through sweat. There's glands in your skin that secrete sebum, which is the oil that helps keep the skin from drying out. Obviously, sometimes if you've got excess sebum, you get oily skin, and that can lead to problems with acne and that kind of thing. But your skin should have some degree of oil because that's quite important for keeping the skin healthy. And there is also important immune responses. So your skin does contain immune cells and things. So there you go, you can see the difference. I forgot how bright purple my character's hair is in this save file. You know, the skin's important. It stores fat and it stores water as well, and plays a big role in your immunity. And another major role that the skin has is in your sensory system, so particularly the senses of touch. So the skin has nerve endings all throughout it for detecting pain, for detecting pressure, for detecting temperature and touch. And this is the case for all animals. So one thing to highlight, because it's something that a lot of people don't really seem to know, I have a little tortoise. He's called Turtwig. He's the angriest tortoise I've ever met in my life, which I find quite funny, just because he's quite small. He's a Herman's tortoise, Testudo hermani, and obviously they have their shell, and that outer layer of the shell is made of keratin. So it's the same thing that makes up your fingernails, your outer layer of skin and your hair. For us, that's what a tortoise's shell is made out of. But underneath that, there's a layer of dermis that has blood vessels and nerve endings and connective tissue and things. So what that means is that if you touch his shell, he can feel that. He knows you're touching his shell. They do have sensation there. And it's something a lot of people don't really seem to realise. But he doesn't like being touched, so I don't tend to do it much. But if I do touch his shell, he knows and he gets annoyed about it. So he's fully aware, even if he can't see me doing it, he knows when he's touching that. So your skin plays an important role in that. And integument is the sort of technical term, and that covers skin, nails, hair, spines, scales, you know, whatever, feet, feathers and birds. All these different aspects that make up the kind of external body, and they play obviously some different roles, but the skin plays a role in sensation, and there are nerve endings for pain. So flaying someone alive, and I got a lot of concern and warnings when I was researching this, so I hope you appreciate that. Is that it's an ancient method of torture and execution. So it is something that they used to do to people as obviously particularly harsh punishment for whatever crime they committed. And it's long been considered an especially painful way to die. So example that kind of comes to mind is that I can imagine most of you have had a paper cut at some point, and it's a tiny shallow cut, but it stings like hell. It could be so painful. So being flayed alive is basically that, but multiplied by 1,000,000 across your entire body. So, you know, it's pain that's almost kind of unimaginable. And it has to be absolutely excruciating, especially since, you know, the rads are kind of keeping them alive and healing them through this, but because they're constantly losing their skin, it doesn't get a chance to regenerate because of the dust storms and the environment that they're living in. but that skin's exposed to the air, and that's got to be so painful. It's got to be extremely painful. And we know that ghouls do feel pain. They maybe aren't held back by it quite as much as humans potentially would be, and maybe their sensation of pain isn't quite as as strong as ours is. But this kind of thing has to be excruciating even for them, that having their skin lost like that, because it is very, very painful. Not that different from, I say, severe burns, unless the burn is severe enough to destroy the nerve endings. But your muscles have nerves in them as well, not just to control movement, but there is also sensory branches of nerves through your muscles, because your brain needs to know where your muscles are, so it knows what to tell them to do. There's a whole feedback system involved in that, so it's something that's got to be excruciatingly painful. So in a way, killing these guys off as you go through the DLC, you could consider that a mercy, really. In my opinion, because they're obviously suffering to be living like that all day, and it's a particularly nasty thing, especially given that certainly Ulysses seems to think that your character is responsible for this because you brought that package from Navarro, which seems to be Eddie, that set off all these nukes and caused this destruction and caused these storms and all of this. And I think it's quite interesting because obviously your player character in this game starts out as a blank slate. They have amnesia, so there's not necessarily a lot that they really remember about what happened before the start of the game, which means that you've got the option of playing them however you want. But it also means that there's things like this, and Ulysses is laying this at your feet and saying, you caused this could have been a great nation that was grown out of this destruction, and you came along and destroyed it, and that's why he hates you so much, and he hoped that you would die carrying the platinum chip, which you obviously almost did. So it's an interesting one, and it's quite brutal. I say, it just looks, it looks awful, it looks horrific, because we're not used to seeing people that look like that, and they're not, even despite all of that, they're not feral, so they've still got their faculties, they've still got their mental capacity. But you can understand probably why they're so angry all the time. I think that's perfectly reasonable considering their circumstances. So just take that when you're in the Divide, killing these marked men is probably a mercy for them in the long run. So something to maybe take some solace in as you go around murdering them all. So hopefully you found that interesting. I know it's kind of a short one, but where festive season's approaching and things are a bit busy, but I am working away in the background getting organised for the new year, and hopefully bringing lots more interesting content for you guys. And just the thing, I've watched the first episode of season 2 and it was really, really good. I have thoughts, I have some questions that I would like to see answered and things like that. So I'm not going to say anything, I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm very intrigued to see. Definitely got a couple of theories about Cooper Howard and about some of the stuff involving Mr. House and everything. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it's going to be interesting this season to see what comes of it. But it's kind of annoying that they're doing that thing where they release one episode a week. TV's not like that anymore. That's how it used to be back in the day, but not now. But that's how they've decided to do it. So I'm thinking about what I want to do, whether I want to make some videos on the topic and talk about my theories and things that I've noticed, breaking down the episodes, or whether I maybe want to write about it and do it, on a blog or something like that. I'm not sure which way I want to do it. What do you guys think? Is that something that you would want to see? Is that something you would be interested in? Is for me to break down the episodes and all the Easter eggs and stuff like that, and what I see and what I think? Because that's certainly something that I would be open to doing if you guys think that would be interesting to talk about. Obviously, it would be full of spoilers and things, but yeah, let me know what you think. And we will be back on Tuesday with some more Point Lookout locations. So there's going to be a couple that are kind of small ones. So I'm going to do a wee group of kind of smaller locations that I think are quite interesting. So that'll be coming on Tuesday. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.